was clear that Hughes had not learned a single lesson from the earlier fiasco, as they knew could predict. The helicopter only trickled in. Feeling desperate, army brass decided to conduct a new auction. Mm, as the new, as you know, as the As they now could predict, the helicopter only trickled in. Feeling desperate, Army Brass decided to conduct a new auction for figured out as it went. It was the exact same predicament as with the reconnaissance plane, which only a few in the military could remember. It was clear that Hughes had not learned a single lesson from the earlier fiasco, as they now could predict. The helicopter only trickled in. The, the helicopter only trickled in. Feeling desperate, Army Press decided to conduct a new auction for the much larger order of the 2,200 helicopter they now needed, hoping a more experienced company would come in with a lower price and users users. Uh, users. Users went into panic mode. To lose this follow-on bid would spell ruin. The company was counting on raising its price for this new order to recoup. The company was counting on raising its price for this new counting on raising its price for this new order. The company was counting on raising its price for this new order to recoup the enormous losses it had incurred with the initial production. That was the bet Hughes had placed. If he tried to come in with a low price for the additional helicopter, he could not return a profit. And yet, if this bid was not low enough, he would be underbid, which was eventually happened. The loss of Hughes in the end for the helicopter he produced was an astronomical $90 million and had a devastating effect on the company. In 1976, Howard Hughes died in an airplane en route from Acapulco to Houston, and as the autopsy was performed on his body, the public finally became aware of what happened to him in the last decade of his life. For years, he had been addicted to pain pills and narcotics. He had lived in tightly sealed hotel rooms, tightly sealed in hotel room, deathly aware to the slightest possible contamination by germs. At the time of his death, he weighed a mere 93 pounds. He had lived in near total isolation, attendant to a few assistant to a few assistants, desperately trying to keep all of this out of the public eye. Desperately trying to keep all of this out of the public eye. It was the ultimate irony that the man who feared more than anything the slighted loss the man who feared it was the ultimate irony that the man who feared more than anything the slightest loss of control had ended up in his last year at the complete mercy of handful of assassination and executed who oversaw his slow death by drugs and wrested essential control of the company from him. Wrested essential control of the company from him. Interpretation. The pattern of Howard Hughes' life was set from very early on. His mother had anxious nature and after learning have no she could have no more children. She directed, and after learning she could have no more children, she directed a great deal of anxiety toward her only son. She smothered him with constant attention. She became his closest companion, almost never letting him out of sight. The father placed tremendous expectation on his son to carry on the family name. The father placed tremendous expectation on his son to carry on the family name. His parent determined everything he did, what he wrote, what he wore, what he ate. His parent determined everything he did, what he wore, what he ate, and who his friends were, although they were very few, and who his friends were, although he were very few. Also, they were very few. They settled him from school to school, looking for the perfect environment for their son, who had shown himself to a hypersensitive and not easy to get along with. Who had shown himself to the hypersensitive and not easy to get along with. He was completely dependent on them for everything, and out of he was completely dependent on them for everything, and out of a tremendous fear of disappointing them, he was supremely polite and obedient. Oh, he was completely dependent on them for everything, and out of a tremendous fear of disappointing them, he became supremely polite and obedient. The truth, however, was that he bitterly resented his total dependence. The truth, however, was that he bitterly resented his total independence. He resented his total independence. Once his parent died, his true character could finally emerge from beneath their smile and obedience. Beneath the smile and obedience, he felt no love toward his relative. He would rather face the future alone than have the slightest bit of authority above him. He had to have complete control, even at the age of 19, over his fate. Anything less would stir up the old anxiety from childhood. The old anxiety from childhood. And with the money he inherited, he had the power to realize his dream. And the money he inherited, he had the power to realize his dream of total. And the money he inherited, he had the power to realize his dream. The money he inherited, he had the power to realize his dream of total independence. The, and with the money he inherited, he had the power inherited. He had the power to realize his dream. He had the power to realize his dream of total independence. His love of flying reflected his character trait. Only in the air alone and at the helm could he really experience the exhilaration of control and release from his anxiety. He could soar high above the masses whom he secretly despised. He could have death he could brave death, which he did many times, because it would be a death under his own power. Because it would be a death under his own power. His character come out even more clearly in the leadership style that he evolved in Hollywood and his other businesses venture. If writers, directors, or executives come forward with their own ideas, he could only see this as a personal challenge to his authority. His he could only see this as a personal challenge to this authority. He could only see this as a personal challenge. He could only see this as a personal challenge to this authority. This would stir up his old. He could only see this as a personal challenge to this authority. This would stir up his old anxiety about being helpless and dependent on others. This would stir up his old anxiety about being helpless and dependent on others. Wow. To combat this anxiety, he would have to keep control of all aspects of the business, overseeing even the spelling and grammar of the smallest publicity notice. He would have to create a very loose structure within his company, making all the executive fight among themselves for his attention. And structure with his company, making all the executives fight among themselves for his attention. Better to have some internal chaos as long as everything flowed through him. The paradox of this was that by trying to gain such total control, he tended to lose it. One man could not possibly keep on top of everything, and so all kind of unforeseen problem. One man could not possibly keep on top of everything, and so all heat become intense. So would despair. So would disappear from the who disappears from the scene or conveniently fall ill. Who disappear from the scene or conveniently fall ill. His need to control everything around him, even extended to the woman he dated. His need to control everything around him, even extended to the woman he dated. He scrutinized their every action, he scrutinized their every action, had them followed by private had them followed by private investigator had them followed by private investigator. The problem had them followed by private investigator. The problem that Howard Hughes presented to all those who choose to work with him in some capacity was that he carefully constructed a public image that concealed the glaring weakness in his character. Instead of the irrational micromanager, he could present himself as the rugged individualist and the consummate American maverick. Most damaging of all was his ability to portray himself as a successful businessman leading a $1 billion empire. In truth, he had inherited a highly profitable tool business from his father. He had inherited a highly profitable. He had inherited a highly profitable tool business from his father. Over the years, the only part of this empire that ran substantially profit were the tool company. Over the year, the only part of his empire that ran substantial profit was a tool company and an early version of Hughes aircraft that he had spun out of the total company for various reasons. Both of this business were run completely independently of Hughes. Input on their he had no input on their operation. The many other business he personally ran, his later aircraft division, his film venture, his later aircraft division, his film venture, his hotels and real estate in Las Vegas, all lost substantially amount that were fortunately covered by the other two. All lost substantially amount that were fortunately covered by the other two. All lost substantially amount that were fortunately covered by the other two. In fact, Hughes was terrible. Hughes was a terrible businessman, and the pattern of failure that revealed this was a plain for everyone to see. But this is the blind spot in human nature. We are poorly equipped to gauge the character of the people we deal with. We are poorly we, we are poorly equipped to gauge the character of the people we deal with. Their public image, the reputation that precedes them, easily mesmerizes us. Their public image, the reputation that precedes them, the easily mesmerizes. We are captivated by appearances. If they surrounded themselves with some alluring myth, as you just did, we want to believe in it instead of determining people's character, their ability to work with others, to keep to their promise, to remain strong in in adverse circumstances. We choose to work with or hire people based on their glittering resume, their intelligence, and their charm. But even a positive trait such as intelligence is worthless if the person also happens if the if worthless if the person also happens to be of weak or dubious character. But even a positive trait such as intelligence is worthless if the such as intelligence but even a positive trait such as intelligence is worthless even the person also even the person also happens to be of weak or dubious character to be or dubious character and so because of our blind spot we suffer under the irresolute leader and the micromanaging boss, the convening the conniving partner conniving partner. This is the source of endless tragedies in history. Our pattern as a species. At all costs, you must alter your you must alter your perspective. At all cost, you must alter your perspective. Train yourself to ignore the front that people display. At all cost, you must alter your perspective. Train yourself to ignore the front that people display. Train yourself to ignore the front that people display, the myth that surrounds them, and instant plumb their depth for sign of their character. This can be seen in the pattern they reveal from their past. This can be seen in the pattern they reveal from the past. The quality of the decision, how they have chosen to solve problem, how they delegate authority and work with others, and countless other signs. A person of strong character is like gold, rare but invaluable. A person of strong character is like gold, rare but invaluable. They can adapt, learn, and improve themselves. They can adapt, learn, and improve themselves. Since your success depends on the people on the people you work with, and for make their character the primary object of your attention. And make their character the primary object of your attention. You will spare yourself the misery of discovering their character when it is too late. For thousands of years, we human believed in fate. For thousands of years, we human believe in fate. Human believe in fate. Some kind of force, spirit, gods, or God compelled us to act in a certain way at birth. Or entire life were laid out in advance. We were fated to succeed or fail. We see the world much differently now. We believe that we are largely in control of what happened to us. We see the world much differently now. We believe that we are largely in control of what happened to us, that we create our own destiny. We believe that we are largely in control of what happened to us. We believe that we are largely in control of what happened to us, that we create our own destiny upon occasion. However, we might have a fleeting sensation that approximate what our ancestor must have felt. Perhaps a personal relationship goes bad, or our career path hits a snag, and these difficulties are uncannily similar to something that happened to us in the past. Or we realize that our way of working on a project needs some improvement. We could do things better. We try to alter our method only to find ourselves doing things in exactly the same way with nearly the same result. We try to alter our method only to find ourselves doing things in exactly the same way with nearly the same result. We might feel for a moment that some kind of malignant force in the world, some curse compel us to relieve the same situation, compel us to relieve the same situation. We can often notice this phenomenon more clearly in the action of the others. We can often notice this phenomenon more clearly in the action of others, particularly those closest to us. For instance, we see friends continually fall for exactly the wrong person, or consciously push away the right person. We cringe at some foolish behavior of others, such as ill considered investment or career choices, only to see them repeat the foolishness a few years later. Once they have forgotten the lesson, we know somehow who always manages to offend the wrong person at the or we know somehow who always manages to offend the wrong person who always manages to or we know someone or we know someone who always manages to offend the wrong person at the wrong time, creating hostility wherever he or she goes. Or we know someone who always manages to offend the wrong person at the wrong time, creating hostility whenever he or she goes. or they crumble under pressure, always in the same way, but blaming others or bad luck for what happened. And of course we know, the addict who get out of their addiction, get out of their addiction. And of course we know the addicts who get out of their addiction only to fall back in or find some other form of addiction. We see this pattern and they don't, because nobody likes to believe that they are operating under some kind of compulsion beyond their control. It is too disturbing a thought. If we are honest with ourselves, we must admire there is some truth to the concept of fate. We are prone to repeat the same decision and method of dealing with problem. There is a pattern to our life, particularly visible in our mistaken. There is a pattern to our life, particularly visible in our mistake and failure. But there is a different way of looking at this concept. It is not speed or God that it is not speed or God that control us, but it is not speed or God that control us, but rather our character. It is not speed or God that control us, but rather our character. The the etymology of the word character from the ancient Greek refers to an engraving or stamping instrument. Character then is something that is so deeply ingrained or stamped within us that it compels us to act in certain ways within us that it compel us to act in certain way beyond within us that it compels us to act in a certain way. Character then is something that is so deeply ingrained or stamped within us that it compels us to act in a certain way. But our awareness and beyond our awareness and control, we can conceive of this character as having we can conceive of this character as having three essential components, each layered on top of the other, giving their giving this character depth. Giving this character depth, the earliest and the deepest layer comes from genetics. From the particular way our brain are wired, which predisposes us towards certain mood and preferences. This genetic component can make some people prone to depression. For instance, this genetic component can make This genetic component can make some people prone to depression. For instance, it makes some people introvert and others extrovert. It might even incline some toward becoming especially greedy for attention or privilege or possession. The psycho, the psychoanalyst Melanie Kellin, who studied infant, believed that the greedy and grasping type of child came into the world predisposed toward his character trait. There might be other genetic factor as well that predispose us toward hostility or anxiety or openness. The second layer, which form above this, comes from our earliest year and from the particular type from the particular type of attachment attachment we found with our mother and caregiver. In these first 3 or 4 years, our brain are especially malleable. In this first 3 or 4 years, our brain are especially malleable. Malleable. Okay. We experience emotion much more intensely, creating memory traces that are much deeper than anything that will follow. Creating memory traces that are much deeper than anything that will follow. In this period of life, we are at our most sus- uh, susceptible, susceptible to the influence of others, susceptible to the influence of others, and the stem from and the stem from three and the stem from these years in profound and the stems from these years is profound. John Bowlby, an anthropologist and psychoanalyst, studied pattern of an attachment between mother and children and came up with four basic schemas: free, autonomous, dismissing, enmeshed, ambivalent, and disorganized. The free autonomous stamp comes from mother who give the children freedom to discover themselves and are continually sensitive to their needs but also protect them themselves and are continually sensitive to their needs but also protect them but also protect them themselves and are continually sensitive to their needs but also continually sensitive to their needs but also protect them but also protect them. Dismissing mother are often distanced, even sometimes hostile and rejecting. Such children are stamped with a feeling of abandonment and the idea that they must continually fend for themselves. The enmeshed, ambivalent mother con- con- are not consistent with their attention, sometimes suffocating and over involved other times retreating over involved other times retreating because of their own problem and or anxiety. They can make their children feel as if they have to take care of the person who should be taking care of them. Disorganized mother send highly conflicting signal to their children, reflecting their own inner chaos and perhaps the early emotional traumas. Nothing their children do it as right, and such children can develop powerful nothing can nothing their children do is right, and such children can develop powerful emotional problem. They are and such children can develop powerful emotional problem. There are, of course, many gradation within each type and combination of them. But in every case of the quality of attachment that we had in our earliest year will create deep tendency within us. In particular, the way we use relationship to handle or modulate our stream. In particular, the way we use relationship to handle our modulate ways have to handle or modulate our stress. Ways have to handle or modulate our stress. For instance, children of the dismissing parent will tend to avoid any kind of negative emotional situation and to wall themselves off from feeling of dependency. They might find it harder to commit to a relationship or will unconsciously push people away. The children of the enmeshed variety will experience a great deal of anxiety in relationship and will feel many conflicting emotions. They will always be ambivalent toward people, and this will set noticeable pattern in their life in which they pursue people and then unconsciously retreat. In general, from these earliest years, people will display a particular tone to their character: hostile and aggressive, secure and confident, anxious and avoidant, needy and missing. These two layers are so deep that we have no real conscious awareness of them and the behavior they compel. and the behavior they compel unless we expend great effort in examining ourselves. Above this, a third layer will form. From above this, a third layer will form from our habit and experiences as we get older. Because older, based on the first two layer, we will tend to rely on certain strategies for dealing with stress, looking for pleasure or handling people. Looking for pleasure or handling people, these strategies now become habit that are set in our youth. These strategies now become habit that are set in our youth. These strategies now become habit that's set in our youth. There will be modification to the particular nature of our character depending on the people we deal with, friends, teacher, romantic partner, and how they respond to us. But in general, these three layers will establish certain noticeable pattern. We will make a particular decision. This is engraved in our brain neurologically. We are compelled to repeat this because the path is already led. It becomes a habit, and our characters form out of this thousand of habit. The earliest ones set well before we could be conscious of them. The earliest one, the earliest ones set well before we could be conscious of them. There is a fourth layer as well. It often is developed in late childhood and adolescence. Idio alias CENCE. Idio alias idio. Alias CNC. As people become aware of their character flaws, they do what they can to cover them up. As people become aware of their character flaws, they do what they can to cover them up. As people become aware of their character flaws, they do what they can do can they do what they can to cover them up. If they sense that deep inside they are anxious, timid type of person, they come to realize that this is not a socially acceptable trait. They learn to disguise it with a front. They compensate by trying to appear outgoing or carefree or even domineering. This make it all the more difficult for us to determine the nature of their character. Some character trait can be positive, reflect inner strength. Some character traits can be positive and reflect inner strength. For instance, some people have a propensity toward being generous and open, mm, empathetic and resilient under pressure. But these stronger, more flexible qualities often require awareness and practice to truly become habit that can be relied upon as we get older. But this stronger, more flexible quality often require to awareness and practice to truly become habit that can be relied upon. As we get older, lives tend to weaken us. Our empathy is harder to hold on to. If we are reflexively generous and open to everyone we meet, if we are reflexively generous and open to everyone we meet, we can end up in a lot of trouble. If you are reflexively generous, if you are reflexively generous and open to everyone, if you are reflexively generous and open to everyone we meet, we can end up in a lot of trouble. Confidence without self-awareness and control can become grandiosity. Confidence without self-awareness and control can become grandiosity. Without conscious effort, this trait will tend to wear down to turn into weaknesses. Without conscious effort, this strength will tend to wear down or turn into weakness. What this means is that the weakest part of our character are the ones that create habit and compulsive behavior because they do not require effort or practice to maintain. Because they do not require effort or practice to maintain. Finally, we can develop conflicting character trait, perhaps stemming from a difference between our genetic predisposition and our earliest influences, or from parent who stamp in us different values. We might feel both idealistic and materialistic. The two part fighting within us, the law remain the same. The conflicted character which is developed in the earliest year will merely reveal a different kind of pattern with decision that tends to reflect a person's ambivalence or that swing back and forth. As a student of human nature, your task is twofold. First, you must come to understand your own character, examining as best you can the element in uh, examining as best as a student of human nature. Your task is twofold. As a student of human nature, as a student of human nature, your task is as a as a student of human nature, your task is twofold. First, you must come to understand your own character, examine as best you can the elements in your past that have gone into forming it, and the pattern most negative that you can see recurring in your life, and the pattern mostly negative that you can see recurring. I see you double R in your life. It is impossible to get rid of this stamp mm, that you can see recurring in your life it is it is impossible to get rid of this stamp that constitutes your character. It is too deep, but through awareness you can learn to mitigate or stop certain negative patterns. You can work to transform the negative and weak aspect of your character into actual strength. You can try to create new habit and pattern that go with them through practice, actively shaping your character and the destiny that goes with it. For more on this, second, you must develop your skill in reading the character of the people you're dealing with. To do so, you must consider character as a primary value when it comes to choosing a person to work for or an intimate partner. The This means giving it more valuable than their charm, intelligence, or reputation. The ability to observe people character as seen in their action and pattern is an absolutely critical social skill. It can help you avoid precisely those kind of decisions that can spill years of misery. Choosing an incompetent leader, a shady partner, a scheming assistant, or the kind of incompatible spouse who can poison your life, or the kind of incompatible spouse who can spoil your life, who can poison your life. But it is a skill you must consciously develop, because we humans are generally inept when it comes to such as assessment because we humans are generally inept when it comes to such assessment. The general source of our ineptness is that the general source of our ineptness is that we tend to base our judgment of people on what is most apparent, but as stand earlier, people often try to recover no, people often try to cover up their weakness by presenting them as something positive. We see people try to cover up their weakness by presenting them as something positive. We see them brimming with self-confidence only to later discover that they are actually arrogant and incapable of listening. They seem frank and sincere, but over time we realize that they are actually Buddhists and unable to consider the feeling of other, or they seem prudent and thoughtful, but eventually we see that they are in fact timid at their core and afraid of the slightest criticism. People can be quite adept at creating this optical illusion, and we fall for them. Similarly, people will charm and flatter us, and blinded by our desire to like them, we fail to look deeper and to see their character flaws.